Hello and welcome to another episode of the Testing Peers. Today we're joined by a couple of, I don't know, semi-regulars? I don't know what we call people these days, but some of our peers regardless. So let me introduce them first of all. So we'll start with Callum.
Hello there, it's me, Callum, a semi-regular.
Yeah. And also Dermot.
Hi, you might recognize me from other podcasts. Well, actually, just this podcast.
And then, rather than our semi-regular, we also have our regular, who is the most, most episodes of the podcast, David?
Yeah. Hello. I'm over 100 now.
Woohoo!
Yeah. Woohoo.
And for those that are still hanging on this long, I'm Russell. So I just want to give a little thank you out to our sponsors, first of all, Saffron QA. They continue to sponsor us and they're here to support the wider testing community. Should any of our listeners be in the market for a new job, new role, in the testing area, looking to hire talent perhaps for their team, please reach out to Ben. You can contact him at ben@saffronqa.co.uk. This week, we're going to talk a little bit about something that we've all been hit with at times, I think. So emergent requirements. So what that means will be different to all of us, I'm sure. So before we go and talk about that a little bit more, over to Banter Corner. Dermot.
It's ironic because there's four of us, and it does sort of seem like my corner is the banter corner and the Zoom meeting that we're conducting in. But yeah, before we hit record, we were talking about Doctor Who. And not everybody is into Doctor Who, certainly, but one of the things that has arisen out of the fandom for Doctor Who is the concept of my doctor, basically the point at which you dropped into the fandom. And for me, that in Doctor Who terms, that was with the fourth Doctor, Tom Baker, which happened in the 70s, even though I watched them in the 80s, but that was my introduction. So for those who don't follow Doctor Who, it's a long-running science fiction show that's been running on UK television since the 1960s. But basically, we're talking about any fandom, really, that you affiliate to, and if it's a long-running fandom. Do you have a particular era, I guess, somewhere you dropped into the fandom and then sort of backfilled as necessary?
For myself, I am a massive Whovian. Yes, behind me is a Cyberman, a head that I have. And I did drop in, although my doctor, if we're going by air date, is the 8th Doctor, Paul McGann. My first introduction to Doctor Who was Peter Cushing. Controversial, not canon. That was my introduction to it. Yes, way back.
He had 2 movies, didn't he?
That's right.
Yeah.
They cancelled the third because the second didn't do so well.
I didn't really get into Doctor Who till the reboot.
Mhm.
So mine was Christopher Eccleston, I think it was, who did the reboot.
It's a good
So
one.
that was probably the one that started me off in it. I'd heard about Doctor Who, but because it wasn't on mainstream TV that much, I hadn't really got into it.
See, when I first met my now husband, way back before even Christopher Eccleston was back on the TV, one of the things that sort of went, yes, we should date each other, is the fact that both of us had watched old Doctor Who. It was a much simpler time. We only had Snake on our phones, and we had to make our own entertainment.
Those were the days. Going back in time, it's kind of topical, I guess.
So for me, I'm not a massive Whovian. I catch it every so often. I would say I was also Tom Baker, but also Peter Davidson. So in the 80s, that's probably my era. There are so many other different ones. Are they Sylvester McCoy? And I'm trying to think of others now.
And I suppose there are so many other fandoms out there. I mean, once people hear these ideas and these periods, they can kind of chime in with their own fandoms. Like Supernatural seems to have been going on forever, and Stargate went on for a good several years. And
The Stargate, yes. That did go on for a long time. One of my cousins is a massive Stargate fan. I think 24, don't know if that counts. That was kind of something I got really obsessed with.
oh yeah,
I love that you're being really hipster and deep cutting, and you haven't referenced the big ones like Star Trek or Star Wars or Marvel or any of the big ones that people geek out over.
You just need to go to Comic-Con, which has just appeared in London, I think. So yes, to see all the fans of everything that's out there.
everything under the sun, and find out new things. And I suppose that's what we're here to talk about.
Nice segue. I like it. So, emergent requirements. Who wants to kick us off? Why don't we start with kind of what we mean by it? Because like most things in life, maybe it's ambiguous to some people. So let's explain some. Who wants to kick us?
Yeah, I can. I sort of floated the topic anyway. So I'm sure as testers, most of us in our careers at some point have come across requirements that have been undocumented or unasked for. Mostly I'm thinking non-functional requirements in that space. I'm pretty sure that we've all worked on projects where no one's ever asked for how performant or secure or accessible or usable they want something to be. And these tend to be things that projects actually need, but we only find out about them through dint of actually benchmarking or finding out about them, playing them back, and people going, oh yeah, actually, I did want that. And so the requirement emerges out of either information or finding or testing or out of the ether somehow. It all comes from a weird place where sometimes organizations don't know what they want and they're unable to articulate that. And so you have to sort of tease out somehow these requirements from people. I don't know if that rings true to other people.
Absolutely. Another factor may be complexity. Maybe they have a concrete idea of what they think, but they haven't done enough passes and they haven't delved too far into the potential complexity of the problem domain, and they haven't figured out what things should link together in order to facilitate priority A, even though they've identified priority A.
I recognize this a lot because I think consultancies have this all the time. Sometimes clients come to us and they're not entirely sure. They come with an idea, go, I want to do this, I want to do X and Y. And we have to then work out how to do it. But also the client then has to work out how they're going to make money, how they're actually going to use it. What actually is it that they're going to actually sell at the end of the day? Because it's all very well coming up and spending potentially millions of pounds on an idea, but unless they can monetize it or do whatever, then actually what's the point in actually working on it in the first place? The other thing is that things like deep tech, that can open a whole new area. The main thing at the moment is AI or machine learning and stuff. You know, we want some AI in our product. And you go, well, what do you mean by that? They go, well, we just want AI. We just want it to do, but unless you know how you're going to use it, then, you know, it's incredibly difficult to build that in.
It ends up being all buzzwords that people have heard that they regurgitate. Very much, it was before AI, it was give me some of that blue sky thinking in the cloud, synergize that, things like that.
Yuck, indeed. And particularly with AI, it's been kind of a field with shifting goalposts, because there have been sort of research areas that have been lumped into the general category of it AI, and then when people figure it out, it stops becoming referred to as AI. So we had like OCR was for a long time considered an AI technology, and then they figured out how to do it, and it's just OCR. It's not AI anymore. So, you know, the thing that you delivered that was AI is no longer AI, and therefore you haven't delivered. Suddenly becomes a conversation that you're having with the client, which is not fun.
Yeah. I remember lots of conversations about chatbots about 7 or 8 years ago, who were sold as AI solutions to problems which had virtually zero artificial intelligence in them. That always amused me. But emerging requirements is kind of like a cornerstone of Agile in many ways in my head. It's about things evolving as you learn. It's about adapting. It's about willingness to change. I've worked in several projects, and I think where I've seen it most prevalent isn't probably Agile, really. It's when I've been working with kind of people who bought SaaS solutions. They think it'll do everything that they want under the sun, and they just simply say it, but then they actually get to use it, and then they have to actually figure out and change it and adapt it. And they've gone from kind of this concept that is just a piece of cake, and they'll just say, I need to set up a bank account or, you know, create something, and then actually realize there's a lot more setup, configuration, changes. So they actually start just writing a few high level things they want, and then realize that actually these systems that they're buying from, you know, Oracle and other places are actually really hugely complex systems that need a lot of configuration setup. And they do it by setting something, checking how it works and exploring it and figuring out what it does. Does it do what I want? And then figuring out what they need, because they've got this you know, financial requirements here, they've got user experience thing here, they've got how they want to operate here, and so on. So that then they have to bring them together, and they've never done that until they actually get their hands on. And there's a lot of discovery that happens when you get your hands on to a solution. I think David was saying it. When you try something, you figure it out a lot more. You learn what works, what doesn't work, which is, in my head, the cornerstone of why Agile is about adapting. It's about kind of working software. It's not about trying to document everything front. It's about getting good enough to then iterate on it and to use that iteration as the next thing to do.
This is something that it really resonates with me, Russell. And it's something that I've spoken about a lot, is that Agile, because you can't or don't want to document down a lot of things, it's about sort of giving a vibe or a sort of an understanding to your team to get them to build what's good enough effectively. You end up with uncertainty because you're not documenting down everything. Uncertainty leads to assumptions. Assumptions lead to potential risks or things going wrong. And only by then exploring it or benchmarking it or understanding what has been built can you then go back and go, oh, actually, this is what I wanted, which would be your emergent requirement. So really resonated with me there.
And I suppose you're not always ready to do those experiments. I tend to maintain that one of the core skills of an agilist is being comfortable with that uncertainty. We'll deal with it when the time comes, and it will emerge over time. So, I mean, we've been talking about emergent properties, and I think we've all been in situations where it's been kind of a curveball from left field, to borrow a sporting term that I don't fully understand, where, you have to adapt or bad things will happen. But this uncertainty and the understanding that there will be emergent properties is not necessarily a bad thing. Like you were saying, Cal, it's kind of built into the process of Agile and just being open to it. I mean, in my experience, I've been in situations where I've been operating in an Agile team, but interacting within kind of a very waterfall organization. So they wanted everything set up a priori at the start, but we were finding stuff out as we went. And it contributed to a lot of tension between the two strata, but it's not a problem unless it's made a problem, I guess, is what I'm getting around to.
If you can adapt an organization, though, and I guess that's the challenge here, because you don't know everything at the start. As much as you want to plan it and predict it, even stories and refinement of stories, I think us as testers get so lost in it, as in we think we could get that story perfect or behaviors right or the acceptance criteria right. The reality is it's first step and it should be refined, but don't basically bet your house on it, if that makes any sense. It's good enough. It's almost almost a strategy that not so vague. It just like say create an account. That's so vague. It's not that valuable, but you've got to go to a little bit lower, but you don't stick to it forever. Just because it was written once doesn't mean it's the thing. So go on.
This all hinges and is all predicated on the idea that somebody in the organization has a level of maturity to understand what good enough looks like. And good enough isn't just like functional requirements. It can be tech stack. It can be like things that live after a project, like maturity. It could be pipeline. It could be grokkability or learnability of code for supportability. And a lot of times the people making these decisions of what good enough looks like really need to be influenced by people in the technology space to help them understand these things. Something that I really have to fight a lot of product owners on, or educate them on rather than fight, I suppose, that's a very negative word, is the idea of good foundations. How many iterations or how many times are you likely to actually change your code base in lieu of not specifying performance up front, not specifying security up front? Because are you happy to like leave that emergent and leave it till later and then re-architect everything you've built to bake that in? It's a bit of a mind shift for a lot of people in that sort of product space to actually try and understand the engineering needs behind things. And I think a lack of maturity in that space can not only harm functional areas, but just engineering as well.
I think it's interesting. What we've discussed is often we need to take into account the difference between verification and validation, because actually they can drive each other. The looking at the requirements and testing those, and then actually how the user is actually going to use them in the end. And in fact, one of the products that I worked on, they weren't actually sure about one particular thing. So it had an accelerometer in this particular device. They know they wanted an accelerometer, but they wanted to know what the granularity of it, how delicate do you have to move it in order to actually register it. So part of it was exploratory testing of the accelerometer to see what could be done. And then there would be emergent requirements based on that of, okay, I then want to be able to do this because I think that it will be registered, and does it actually follow through when you put it all together in terms of that. So in terms of agile and iterations, that was a really good example of how you can create these emergent requirements for a better product.
And do you not find, you mentioned exploratory testing there, and you mentioned a key part of testing within these environments where there are undocumented requirements and uncertainty is having to explore and put forward like potential, like, is this right? Is this right? And uncovering for those emergent requirements. I think one of the biggest headaches that we find a lot of testers who have moved from traditional confirmatory testing towards agile testing have had is that ability to go and say, right, okay, I've looked at something. You haven't told me to look at this, but here's what I'm seeing, and here's the problem. It's a really difficult switch for people to go from tick, 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 tick to, okay, but.
Mm-hmm.
That was always my problem in having scripts to write, because I would go, I want to press that button. I want to put in odd characters in a password. I want to see, but the script says I have to do this, that, the other, which is why I've constantly challenged that and gone, you can't just test one thing.
Yeah, it's that golden phrase. It's the thing we always start with as a user. I may not be the typical user. I may not be like, I may not use whatever app is being developed on my phone, or maybe I don't even use that kind of phone, but you have to put yourself in the mindset of the person who will be using it. And you have to kind of consider, first of all, what you consider to be a useful spending of your time on the app. And secondly, you have to consider what you might do in order to intuitively interact with the application and see if that's going to break it. You know, that's the whole exploratory thing, I guess, is that you're taking on the persona. It really kind of, historically anyway, it kind of fed into my amateur dramatics endeavors more than my mathematical or computational mindset, because I had to pretend to be somebody else.
It's one of the most important things, I think, with emerging stuff to a degree, of just trying to understand what matters, what risks are important, what you're trying to work out, whether you want to test it's functionally working, whether the flows are working, whether it, is it important that it's cross-browser? Is it important that you check it on mobile versus not? Just trying to understand what actually matters to your stakeholder. What's the purpose? Is it a proof of concept? Is it an experimental app? Is it trying to test an accelerometer? You're just trying to get a concept, see if it works and refine it, get something to a user, get some feedback. What is it, the goal? If you can work that out and then work out the risks, you can provide so much more risk information, so much more importance, and have conversation with stakeholders. You can frame things to what matters versus blindly, I guess.
And here's the thing, Russell, to yes and that. We talked a bit, and Dermot, you talked about exploring around the stuff that they know about. We talked about functionality. The stuff that matters is the stuff they don't talk about and don't understand, that you have to ram down their throats occasionally. Things like security or performance or like technical excellence and technical quality, because that's the risk profile. But if we focus our testing on what they care about or what matters, or they think they care about, then we miss uncovering so many risks.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Testing is discovery. Testing is a stage in the process. Testing feeds into further development, but more importantly, testing feeds into further planning, because we don't know what we don't know. The whole phrase of, there are known unknowns and unknown unknowns. It's only through testing that we figure that out, because you can't have thought of everything up front. So you just probe, you just puzzle around.
But be careful, because testing doesn't find them all either.
The other thing is that, with the traditional sort of waterfall thing, is that if you have, during the development process, if you have emerging requirements, you don't know what effect that has on other different things if you only test at the end. So therefore, if a test fails, you don't know where along the chain it has failed. Whereas actually, if you do testing agile throughout the whole process, then if something once worked and then it then fails, you then have a place that you're happy with. So testing throughout the whole life cycle is vitally important in order to enable you to go back to a place where you were happy.
Have any of you had this situation where you found that the product that you delivered at the end in some critical way was vastly different from what was initially specified?
That's a hard one to answer. Yes and no. I've seen very vaguely specified things. So actually what came out was a lot more detailed, a lot more thought through, rather than just, as an example, you can create a bank account. That was the level of requirements I got at times. You can create a bank account, you can purchase some things, you can do some trading. So it became very different because it came far more complex than the simplicity that was specified. And then all the other processes about, counter fraud and securities, and that was never specified, but clearly a requirement that came out of the blue. So it became arms and legs different to what it was really specified as.
For me, I think it depends on the appetite of risk for the clients. There have been some startups that they just go, let's just start with a blank page, let's do whatever. And then there are more established clients who go, we've got this product, we want to add Bluetooth to it, we want to do this, that, and the other. And so therefore the level of risk, if for an established project, is very different to a client who goes, I want to disrupt this particular area. So give me ideas as to how I might do that. In which case they are open to ideas and they will go down different paths in order to challenge the current expectations. Whereas established, more traditional will just go through a similar path of, and sometimes they've come to us and gone, we want this idea, but actually we want it in this way, and we're going to do agile, but we're going to tell you what you're going to do in each particular sprint up front. And so therefore we know what we're going to get at the end. And you go, that agile isn't quite like that. You can't plan ahead. We need to be able to change things as we go through, because some work is harder than others.
When you start, you don't know all the answers. Otherwise, waterfall would work successfully.
Absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head there with risk, David. All projects have an inherent level of risk. And some people think that they have a risk threshold that they're comfortable with, but it's actually not going to allow for innovation. It's not going to allow for an adaptive process, even if they say they're practicing adaptive development, if they're, reactive to what may be these emergent properties that they might uncover. And I saw this especially again with Waterfall, was that, you had the statement of work, you had the a priori pre-agreed things that you were going to work on, and that was it. And you delivered on those, and everything else was for another day, including risk, which, at release time, that's going to come back and bite you, I think. It's interesting, and it's been interesting to me in the past several years, kind of talking to customers who have a differential view of risk. Like, different industries obviously have a different level of risk, but even within those industries, different companies, different organizations within those companies would have a different idea of the acceptable risk that they're open to. And it necessarily impacts the velocity with which they deliver new features.
For me, when it comes to, you talk about risk there, is helping the organization understand those risks as well that they are undertaking. So case in point would be accessibility. I've worked on a number of applications, a number of front end pieces where accessibility has not been foremost thought of as a requirement, thought of as a need for the product at all. It takes some education and some teaching about the risks, and some inspiring, and just talking about like the things that the market share that accessibility can bring to you, the fact that people do need that help and it's the right thing to do as well. So we talk about appetite to risk, that again, because organizations sometimes don't know what they don't know or don't know what they want, they can't really grasp onto risks very well either, or understand them deeply. So you do have to take that time as a tester to show things. And that could be, I've done a lot in that space of benchmarking. So you run your accessibility test and you show specifically these types of people would find it difficult to do this. These types of people would find it difficult to do this. Or like, it's very small. How many people do you know that wear glasses? Oh, look, there we go. Accessibility needs. So many people. So it does take a lot of education and teaching and mentoring and coaching of organizations to help them get to that place, because I think that there's different types of emergent requirements, ones that we could have anticipated, where we have maturity and we just didn't write it down because we thought we were all on the same page. And also the types of emergent requirements that come out of just not knowing anything in a less mature organization. And that's the harder one for testers, because you've got to sell ideas and train people, right?
I was going to link this back to the PeersCon 24, because we're talking about risk, and one talk that really springs to mind that has highlighted this was obviously Heather Reed, who renamed the minimal viable product to minimum shippable risk, which I think is a fantastic way of looking at things. And Cal, you hit the nail on the head there by setting expectations to the client. What is it? What is the minimum shippable risk that we can send this out? And I think that's a really valid way of rethinking how we release things, and a good way to describe it to the clients.
It's interesting because it can shift how you release software as well, into kind of feature flagging, experiments, A/B testing, all these different models that can de-risk a change so that you can actually get feedback from a subset rather than pushing and forcing everyone to accept a change. How many times have you used a SaaS platform that's done a fundamental change, didn't know anything about, and it just annoyed you because you couldn't figure out how to do it? Or you've used something that gives you a beta version. There's a little button at the top that says, do you want to try the new one? Guess what? It's a better experience.
Then that allows your customers to actually help drive that emerging requirements. How are they actually using the product? How are they're recognizing it isn't the finished thing. They're recognizing there are risks in the actual software or whatever they're using, but they can help drive the change because they're using it in a different way and it's not actually working.
And you're opening a dialogue as well with the user.
Absolutely. And they get ownership of it. They get ownership of the product.
Actual feedback rather than opinions.
Yeah.
Right.
As a dev team, we can give opinions to a blue in the face. Just that.
As testing and benchmarking with customers, like, you want your testers to go out there and talk to people. Like, it's great to get a UX designer to talk to people, but then you get part of the story. Like, testers are good at actually digging in and uncovering more of those emergent requirements because they've got a testing mindset. They are more exploratory in their nature,
and they also are very good at asking questions. And that's the thing about emergent requirements, is asking those questions. The important thing is asking questions to find out from whoever you're asking the question to, what is it that's most important to them? What is it do they actually want it to do? And that doesn't need to necessarily be, I want it to be flashing. It's what message do they want it to do? Is it obvious? Is it intuitive? Is it all those things that will allow people to use the product successfully, easily, without having to go through a 250-page, user guide in order to do it?
A lot of this is really interesting, but one thing I'm going to throw in there is a sort of delivery manager hat, which is emergent requirements can be very dangerous from delivery management perspective, or trying to herding cats, because like anything, it's adapting, but you've got to know when to stop, when to move on, when to pause, when to start looking at something else. Because I've seen projects as well where you refine something forever, trying to make everyone happy, which you can't do. And then you spend all your time doing this one feature for 6 months, where actually in that 6 months you were meant to deliver 4 or 5. And you end up with one perfect but not perfect thing, and then 5 things not done. And then guess what? Whoever paid the money gets upset, and the whole team gets the pressure. The whole team feels the responsibility. And I guess this is where it comes in for us. We can advocate for good enough versus constant refinement, because we could always find bugs. It's what we do for fun.
In that space, because you talked about the investors and people higher up who, again, are going to get annoyed. How often do we as testers get access to and discuss to, say, C-suite, the investors, the actual organization, to help them understand, you have asked for this type of product in your industry. What does that really mean? That means baking in these types of things, or supportability, or maintainability. That's where the costs are going. Here are the risks to that. So I think, especially at that level, you can start thinking of software development as, I buy a product off the shelf and it's good to go and it's good to go forever. It's not like that. You have to invest and build into things. But who's doing that educating? Who's best placed to do that? And is that testers?
Indeed. And I tend to think, because testers have, by discipline, have an appreciation of the various levels at which you test. So, unit testing, integration testing, UAT, that they have more of an holistic view of what's being delivered and what requirements are being filled and whose requirements they are, or at least they have the potential for that. Whether they're allowed to or not depends on the culture in the organization or whatever. But yeah, it does tend to be testers needing to be involved in the conversation in order to kind of surface a lot of that. I'm not saying that developers, that scrum masters, that designers can't have that view also, but we all benefit from having everybody at the table. The variety of different viewpoints always improves one's understanding of the problem domain. So absolutely get the people who see the most in the room to tell everybody what they've identified within the product, within the development, within the solution space.
And this is why I've been blogging and trying to put posts out there to try and showcase that testers can do that, or people from your engineering department can do that. Testers
I love those
especially.
posts, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Testers can really do that, but again, at levels of C-suite, at levels of management or investors, testing might be seen as it comes at the end kind of viewpoint, which is like that very production line, Ford car, someone rubber stamps things at the end. People don't know to engage testers to help with not just emergent requirements, which is shifting left, but also cultural change. Actually talking and setting what does good look like for you? What is good enough? And that's different from an engineering perspective, from a product perspective, from an organizational perspective, and an investment perspective. We as testers need to have all of those levels of knowledge to actually advocate for what quality is. Because as we know, quality basically is fit for purpose for a certain person at a certain time. So it's massively subjective based on who you are in that sort of ranking.
Yeah, and whatever the ranking comes from, is it money? Often it is money. Who spends the most, and from what quarter? But
depends what you're doing, isn't it? It's selling things on a website like Amazon, or subscriptions and different models, or if you're selling a product as a whole, does drive most people's designs. Public good.
Yeah,
it's interesting how the different things drive different good enoughs.
But on that note, and going back to what you were saying, Russell, about the priorities and so on, I tend to think of it as like this continuum. Like you've got priority and risk. Who spends the most money on getting a product out often dictates who their priorities get kind of bubbled up to the top, and then the risk of delivery of that product, that priority, that requirement, and then I don't know. It's a very kind of multi-dimensional space to try and visualize, but you can't please everyone, certainly not straight away. So whose input do you prioritize? And it's almost never just one input, right?
I think it's always tricky as testers. I think we can advise as to what best to do, and we can talk to the right people in order to make sure that they have visibility of what their options are. But at the end of the day, it's whoever, as you say, usually the budget holders, who make the final decision as to what it is.
Same with defects and all the bugs and things that we raise. We can give you advice on them. We can tell you if you think it's important, but ultimately, we're probably not the best person to say. Otherwise, we'd get a lot of bugs fixed, because we all care about quality and don't want any of them. But we're not the budget holder usually. We're just the one to advise you with the impact, the severity, and so on that goes with these things. So it's somebody, I'm going to say important, but we're all important, but somebody who has the sway to decide the ultimate value. And that usually isn't the tester and the team. They can influence it. But, it's if you're doing Scrum, then it's that sort of product owner type role. But it varies the setups.
So it's a really interesting point and an interesting discussion. So I've seen posts about this as well on social media, that's really trying to put forward that idea of testers as separate to the decision-making process, just advisory, and so on. And I think it probably depends what organization you're in, for sure, because definitely as part of a team, especially in like a startup or a team where you've got a stake in that team and that product and so on, that level of advice is very changeable, I would say. Like you do need to, again, educate and tell people what these things are. Yes, you don't have the final decision on things, But I think sometimes the narrative of we give advice or we just advise, we raise a bug and then it's out of our hands, can become a little bit sort of like passive almost.
Throw it over a fence type thing.
Yeah. And again, when you're dealing with like these emergent requirements or issues or bugs or whatever, it can be from a place of people just don't know and they need telling, they need helping, they need support. And that's what testing is. It's that advice, that trusted advice, that's a type of support, and that's active rather than passive, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It always depends on what's that famous quote by is it Chris Armstrong? Context. It does completely depend on the context. I think that's ultimately the thing, and we do have a role to play in it. I think that goes without saying.
In times past, I used to refer to the educational moments as why you're wrong sessions, but my opinion has kind of matured over time. It's more of a collaboration. The opportunity to educate it moves everyone forward. It even, the person who's doing the education, it moves them forward because it's not so much a didactic process. It's like collaboration. It's discussion. It's learning together so that you can move forward together.
And that's a perfect place to end. So thank you so much for the great chat tonight. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Thank you, Dermot and Cal, for your input. If you'd like to contact us, please email us at contactus@testingpeers.com. We are having the conference next year as well for the PeersCon 25. So please, if you would like to look or buy a ticket very early, just look for Testing Peers 25 online and you'll find tickets. Thank you very much to our sponsors, Saffron QA, and please look out for us on the social media, especially LinkedIn, but other social media channels as well. We're available there, so look out for us and search for us and find us. But thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you again next time.
For now, it's goodbye from the Testing Peers.
Goodbye. Goodbye. We wish you all a last goodbye.